Hey, what's going on guys? This is Jake at That Fit Friend, and today I'm going to be talking about the Reebok Nano X4. So in this video, I'll be going over some first impressions that I've had with the shoe during my first workout sessions. I'll talk about the sizing of this model, compare it to the Nano X3, and then go over my workouts in this shoe with some VO and explain from a coaching perspective why I did what I did in this shoe to test this model's stability and versatility. But three first impressions that I have with the Nano X4 is number one, the shoe breaks in a lot faster than the Nano X3. So that's for two reasons in my opinion. Number one, this model has a tongue gusset. So in the Nano X3, it did not have a gusseted tongue, and I found that tongue to actually move around a little bit when training, especially when doing lateral work. And then also, the boot of this model has been reworked in the sense that the chassis system has been brought down, but this boot also comes in a little bit more and it hugs the boot and heel a little bit better. So when breaking this shoe in, I found it to break in a little bit quicker because that gusset and boot help give you an additional secure feeling. So if you found that the Nano X3 could at times feel a little bit clunky or stiff out of the gate, I think the shoe's break-in process will probably be 50% faster. So it's not gonna necessarily maybe break in right out of the gate on the first session for you, but for me, it was like on that tail end of my first session, or even on the second session, where I started to feel like the shoe felt really good on my foot. The second first impression that I have with the shoe is that if you liked the Nano X3, I do think you'll like the Nano X4. So this is an even year model, which means that the core construction and DNA of this shoe is very similar to the Nano X3. And if you like that model and you like the lift and run chassis system and how that shoe fit, you're gonna like the Nano X4. It almost feels like an upgraded version, similar to how the X2 felt to the X1. The shoe does feel better on the foot, as I just mentioned in point one, but also you're going to get a similar level of stability and versatility with the shoe because the Reebok Float Ride Energy Foam midsole has remained consistent and unchanged, and you also still have this full rubber outsole. So if you liked the stability and versatility that you got with the Nano X3, I would expect the exact same feeling with the Nano X4, which could be a good thing. Now that said, if you didn't really like the Nano X3 for those performance characteristics, then I would say tread lightly with the Nano X4 because it's not gonna feel revolutionary or so much different than that prior iteration. My third first impression with this shoe is I like the reworked upper, but also the lift and run chassis system back here. So regarding the upper construction, I think this model does breathe a little bit better than the Nano X3 did. It just feels a little bit lighter with this flex weave upper and how it's been reworked. It's not as rigid regarding its material and layering in my opinion, and I'm gonna cut the shoe open eventually and we will take a closer look, but it just feels a little bit lighter and my feet have remained relatively cooler in this shoe compared to the Nano X3, relatively speaking, when I'm training in a gym with a similar temperature. And yes, this is something I actually tested because I put one model on one foot, one model on the other foot, went through a little bit of a workout, and I was like, okay, I can actually feel a little bit of difference in the Nano X4. So if your feet traditionally run a little bit warmer, I think you will like that change. Also, with the lift and run chassis system, I mentioned this already, but they brought down the TPU, so it's not as aggressive around the boot. I kind of like this because it limits some of the weight of the heel and it doesn't give it such a blocky and bulky feel, and you're still getting that same performance with the lift and run chassis system in my opinion. I haven't noticed any big issues with this. I haven't noticed that it performs any different for my interval runs and my sprints, so I think that is a nice change that's gonna limit the overall bulk and weight of this shoe. Now regarding sizing, this model fits very similar to the Nano X3. If anything, I almost feel like it fits a little bit better just because with that gusseted tongue, it does feel a little bit better regarding its security on the foot right out of the box. But if you found the Nano X3 to fit too snug and you didn't like the overall width or how it had a little bit of arch, the X4 is gonna feel very similar, so definitely steer clear or at least consider this before investing in the Nano X4 if you had issues with the Nano X3 regarding those fit specs. But I think for most folks, true to size should be a safe call. This model has more of what I would call like a regular medium to slightly wider width. It's not gonna be your widest training shoe on the market, but I think for most foot anatomies, it should work fine. Now that said, if you have a foot width that is wider than a double E width foot or a flatter midfoot, I would say tread lightly with this shoe because the arch can feel a little bit off-putting, and this model doesn't have like the roundest toe box, which some of the older models had. So definitely keep that in mind, and I'll share more on the sizing of the shoe in my full review. So if you don't plan on necessarily buying a shoe before that full review rolls out, I'll have more context there for you. But all that said, let's do a quick rundown of the Nano X3 versus the Nano X4. All right, so when looking at the Nano X3 versus the Nano X4, as you can see, the core DNA of these models remain relatively unchanged. So you have a similar stack height, you have a similar midsole, outsole, and just general silhouette of this shoe. The core differences revolve around the upper of these models. So in the Nano X4, you have a lighter weight flex weave upper. You also have some overlays here in the midfoot to help give the shoe additional ventilation. In the Nano X3, it was pretty consistent throughout with the flex weave. It was a little bit heavier and it feels a little bit more rigid. And then looking at the lift and run chassis system, in the Nano X3, that wrapped up here around the heel. Now this added a bunch of weight and bulk to the heel. It gave you a decent level of lateral security, but it did add some extra bulk to this model regarding its overall weight. In the Nano X4, this has been brought down a lot, so you only have a TPU overlay that comes up to here, and then you don't have a TPU overlay that wraps up around the top of the heel. You also have a boot that's also been reworked to kind of cup around the heel a little bit more, and it doesn't necessarily flare out. So if you found that the X3 gave you a little bit of heel slip, this is a nice change in my opinion for your needs. The final call out between these two shoes that I want to draw attention to is the tongue gusset. So in the Nano X4, we now have a tongue gusset, which was a feature that I felt like the X3 desperately needed at times. In the X3, this tongue could slide around, even though it had two loops here for security. I had issues with tongue security at times. In the Nano X4, you still have two loops, but you now have a gusset as well. So that helps kind of hug the foot a little bit better and give you a smoother break-in process regarding how the shoe feels on your foot. Now I will have a full Nano X3 versus Nano X4 video coming out in the future, but I wanted to go over some topical changes that have been made in the Nano X4 because at first glance, these shoes do look very similar, and a difference that you don't necessarily see out of the gate is their weights. The Nano X4 definitely has a lighter weight compared to the Nano X3, which could be big for folks who thought that Nano X3 felt a little bit too heavy at times. Today was a Hatfield squat day with some accessories for the glutes, hamstrings, and calves. Now, with my warm-up sets for these, I'll usually use load as my mitigator to prime myself for my sets, but then I'll also spend some time on my adductors and glutes. My top sets today were a 3x11 at 285, 325, and 375. Really stoked at how that top set felt. I almost feel like my knee is back to 100%. I would say we're still at about like 90%, so I have had to kind of mitigate some of my stuff when it comes to jerks and power cleans, but for the most part, we are feeling back and ready. Then we moved into some goblet step-ups. These have been awesome for concentrically loading the knee and the quads without having too much eccentric load, because I will do more eccentric loaded stuff after this, deeper into my workout program. We also had some snatch grip RDLs. These are awesome for just training myself in a different means than your traditional RDL. It also makes me focus on limiting my intensity because I can't go as heavy. After this, I hit some calves and I hit some reverse Nordic curls. All right, y'all, that wraps up this video breaking down my first impressions of the Reebok Nano X4. Overall, I think this is a stronger shoe than the Nano X3. The curated updates seem like it gives this shoe a more secure and better feeling out of the box. If you have additional questions on this model, drop a comment down below or reach out to me personally, whichever you prefer. And as always, y'all, drop a like on the video, drop subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.